welcome back to another episode of the Jake Bequette Show podcast. I'm Jake Bequette, your host, back after a week off. I apologize for being absent last week, but it was very much worth the absence. I spent the last week to really about 10 days in Normandy, France for the 79th anniversary of the D-Day invasion, Operation Overlord. And I've got a lot to tell you about that. I think you'll find it very interesting. I certainly did. It was really a moving program, really, I wouldn't say life-changing, but it was my first time over to continental Europe, and my first time to Normandy. As an Army veteran myself, who served in the 101st Airborne in this area, these operations are part of my legacy with the 101st Airborne, part of everyone's legacy who served in the military, particularly in those units who participated in the D-Day operation and the march eastward across Europe into Germany. It was a really the program was put on by the Best Defense Foundation, which is operated by Donnie Edwards, a former NFL player, and a man who truly, he and his wife Catherine have a true love and reverence for America's veterans, particularly those of the World War II generation. Donnie's been volunteering and doing these programs for I think 15 years now. He started off as a volunteer, and now he created his own foundation 5 or 6 years ago, Best Defense, BDF, and it really was a first-class operation. We took 45 World War II veterans with us. It was a grueling week-long program, but well worth it. I mean, these guys are old. I mean, they're in their late 90s, in some cases in their hundreds. I think the oldest on the program was 102, 103. But they are screened for mobility, and they're all in relatively good health. I mean, a lot of them are. It's amazing how well they get around for being at such an advanced age and how sharp they are mentally. And I was a volunteer. My job was to be a caretaker for one of the 45 veterans. And I want to tell you about the veteran who I looked after because he really is a great American and just an amazing man. Sergeant Jack Foy. Jack Foy was born in 1925, and he left Cornell University to serve in the Army Infantry. He fought in Patton's Third Army, the 87th Infantry Division, the Golden Acorns. They're no longer in existence. But it really is amazing when you think about it. I mean, he was a very intelligent young man who went to Cornell when he was 17, and after he had turned 18, he decided to leave and become an enlisted man in the Army Infantry. He picked up a machine. He left Cornell University, picked up a machine gun, and went and won the war. I mean, that really is the story of so many men of the greatest generation. And it was amazing to be around Jack and so many others who had similar stories. Jack did not participate in D-Day. He was still training stateside during the Normandy invasions, but he arrived shortly thereafter with his unit. He first saw action in the Sarre Valley along the French and Belgian border. He fought his way into the Ardennes forest. He saw extensive action at the Battle of the Bulge, and he was a machine gunner. This was a man who saw a ton of action. He said that his company of about 200 men, all Ivy League students, 80 of the 200 were killed. The rest were wounded. I think Jack said 14 of the original 200 made it through totally unscathed. He was one of those 14. I say unscathed. He received 3 wounds. He said they were flesh wounds. A Jeep he was driving was blown up by a mine. He was thrown out of the vehicle into a snowbank, which probably saved his life. But he saw extensive action, a lot of heavy fighting at the Bulge, through Bastogne, through the town of Foy, which bears his name, on crossing the Moselle and the Rhine River, and fighting his way across the Rhine. He was in his unit. He kind of commandeered a troop transport vehicle that was ferrying soldiers back and forth across the Rhine until on his last run it got destroyed by German fire, and he swam across the Rhine to safety. He finished the war in Czechoslovakia. He linked up with the Russian army in Czechoslovakia. and then he was home in the United States on leave when the war in Japan ended. They were all planning to be transferred out to the Pacific for the invasion of the Japanese home islands before the A bombs were dropped and Japan surrendered. But Jack, I mean, he's a true hero. As I said, a great American, and it was a privilege to spend time with him. He's a crusty guy from Rochester, New York. Great personality, great sense of humor, self-deprecating, loves to joke around. We had a blast, and just to be able to take this journey with him to see these historical sites. I'll take you through the itinerary, and it really was a once in a lifetime opportunity that I did not take for granted. So. We flew straight into Deauville Airport in Normandy. Delta Airlines very generously sponsored a charter flight for the entire group there and back from Atlanta to Deauville and back to Atlanta. So we arrived in Normandy on June the 1st. We had a dinner there put on by a lot of local dignitaries, and I will take a moment to express my appreciation and gratitude toward the French people, the Norman people. It's hard to put into words the reverence and respect and honor they have for these World War II veterans. You have to imagine the Normans, the French, they were under German occupation for 4 years, and it's part of their culture, it's part of their legacy to educate their children, the next generation, about this occupation, about the war. And as you can imagine, they have an unbelievable admiration for the liberators. And every year when these men come over, we had so many parades and banquets. We went to a school there in Caen. We spent the night in Caen at a hotel in Caen, Caen, not Caen in the south of France, Caen in Normandy. We stayed there at a hotel, and I mean there were townspeople who were at our hotel getting autographs and pictures, and I mean it was just amazing to see the outpouring of support, much more than you'd see in the United States. That's a different story. We can get to that. But we had our first banquet there that night on the 1st. The 2nd was when the program really started. We went to the American Cemetery at Omaha Beach, and if I had never been there, but I was somewhat prepared for the emotion of that. You all remember the opening scene in Saving Private Ryan, where the old man is wandering through the American cemetery. It's that place. It's where that scene was filmed, and if you've never been there before, you have to go. We went there twice on June the 2nd, and then on the actual anniversary for a ceremony on June the 6th. It's an incredibly moving place. Over 9,000 American soldiers are buried there, eternally resting away from their home. Not all of those were killed on D-Day, but most of them were killed in the initial weeks of Operation Overlord. As you recall, the D-Day was just the beginning of the invasion. The Normandy campaign, if you will, lasted for a couple of months, really until Caen and Cherbourg and St. Lo were secured, and the Allies could start moving east. The success of the operation was far from certain. On the evening of June the 6th, there was still a lot of work to be done. So we visited the cemetery, got a great tour from one of the guys there, saw some of the more famous soldiers who were buried there. Teddy Roosevelt Jr. is buried there, a Medal of Honor recipient. He insisted on coming ashore with the initial waves on the morning of June the 6th, even though he had very serious health complications. He ended up dying of a heart attack, as a matter of fact, a couple of weeks later. But he's buried there, and he was a Medal of Honor recipient. I'll post some of these photos on social media later so you can see, but it really was amazing. We went from there, from the American cemetery over to Le Camp, which is the German cemetery, which was really interesting. I'm really glad that we did this. There are tens of thousands of German dead that are buried all over France, who were never repatriated back to Germany. Obviously, after the war, Germany really no longer existed as a country. It was divided into, Berlin and the country were divided into separate spheres of Allied and Soviet influence. And so a lot of these German soldiers soldiers of the Wehrmacht are buried there. And Many of them are marked graves. Many are unmarked. They were mass graves, 4 or 5 German soldiers to a grave, and it was really interesting. Jack, on a previous trip to Normandy, he had visited the German cemetery, and he told a remarkable story about meeting with a group of German soldiers a few years ago at the German cemetery, and he said it was a very emotional meeting, as you can probably imagine. He was openly crying as he told the story. But I think it brought him some closure. I mean, he was a machine gunner. He was on the front lines. He took many lives, and the Germans took many lives of his friends. And it was really poignant to hear him speak about that war, and how he really, to this day, has mixed emotions about the war. On a certain level, he saw the Germans as his countrymen. Jack Foy. There's a town in Belgium called Foy, and these were Europeans fighting Europeans, people of European descent fighting people of European descent, and he certainly felt that not all the Germans were evil Nazis, not even close. These are his words, and so it was very fascinating to hear him speak about that, and just to really share that with us and with me. So we then went to a ceremony in the town of Carentan. If you've seen Band of Brothers, you know all about the Battle of Carentan. It was a very, very bloody engagement. We went to a Legion of Honor, Légion d'honneur ceremony there in Carentan. We had a World War II veteran with us who was a member, amazingly enough, of my old unit, 1327 Glider Infantry. This man George Mullins received the Legion of Honor, as the French would say, Légion d'honneur. As you know from my Napoleon episode, the Légion d'honneur was created by Napoleon in 1804, 1805. It's an award. There are different classes of the award, but at its most original format, it is a military decoration. And Sergeant Mullins received this award for valor 79 years later, after fighting with the 101st Airborne in France. So, as you can imagine, it was an incredibly emotional ceremony. George is very old. He was in very poor health. And this was his goal for years, to be able to come to Carentan to receive his Legion of Honor. And he did. And as you can imagine, there was not a dry eye in the house to witness that ceremony. There were numerous, over the course of the week, as you can imagine, there were numerous high up military officers from the French military, the American military, the German military, all the allies. There were at least half a dozen 4-star generals from the American military who were there, and it was their respect for these World War II veterans was palpable. So that was June the 2nd. Saturday, June the 3rd, we had a massive parade through Carentan. This was a pretty amazing ceremony. We had a parade through the city, right to the town square. If you were following my social media thread throughout the week, we had a really cool ceremony right there in the town square, where there were many reenactors who came. That's another thing about this week. This entire week, Normandy week in France and Normandy, is just an amazing. It's an amazing week of celebrations. People come from all over Europe to witness it, to be reenactors. There's a massive camp for the reenactors who dress in period clothing and live on the outskirts of Carentan for the entire week. And they stay there and they dress up in 40s era military and civilian costumes. And there were reenactments there in Carentan. There was a massive ceremony for these World War II veterans. George Mullins was again honored for his Légion d'honneur. And after that, we went to a museum there in town where they had operational World War II vehicles. That's another thing that's pretty fascinating. I was speaking with an active duty French soldier who was a reenactor, and he was telling me that if you took a metal detector really at any open field in Normandy, it wouldn't take you long to start finding bullets and shrapnel and artifacts from the war. I mean, there were millions of men, millions of soldiers who were fighting in Normandy for many months. And the Germans fought there in 40, and I mean there was you had the Battle of Britain, aircraft and bombs going off. I mean it was a very active theater of operations, and these artifacts. I mean a lot of stuff was left behind, and the people of Normandy have done an amazing job of preserving these pieces of history over the past 80 years. On Sunday, June the 4th. It was a very fun day. There was a large detachment of active duty American military soldiers who were there in Normandy for the week of celebrations. There were some airborne jumps that took place at this place outside of Saint-Mary-Église called La Fière. Again, you recognize from the series Band of Brothers, which if you haven't seen it, I recommend you watch Band of Brothers. After you listen to this podcast, do it now. But Saint-Mary-Église was one of the towns directly to the south, right behind Utah Beach, where there were a lot of paratroopers dropped from the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions. Their job on D-Day was to neutralize German soldiers and German artillery and German indirect fire on the Utah and Omaha beaches. And Saint-Mary-Église was a very important part of that operation to secure that town. We had a parade through Saint-Mary-Église, which was just unbelievable. I mean, these towns they're preserved mostly just how they looked in 1944. The old buildings, most of them are rebuilt, and very little has changed. I mean, you've got cobblestone streets. I mean, I can't tell you how breathtakingly beautiful the region of Normandy is. I mean, it's truly amazing. Just the weather, the people, the scenery, the food, the nationalistic sentiment. It was all so beautiful and so fantastic. And that was certainly present at Saint-Mary-Église. We then went to Utah Beach. We saw Utah Beach and got a tour of the beach there, and then we had another museum visit and a dinner there at the museum, which was one of the many museums in Normandy dedicated to the Overlord operation. The next day was Monday the 5th. We started the day with a ceremony over at Pegasus Bridge. So if you recall, this is more towards the eastern theater of operations in Normandy. There were the two American beaches. I mean, the Allies invaded, hitting five or six beachheads. Going from west to east, you had Utah and Omaha, which were the two American beachheads. And then I forget the order, but it was Sword Beach, Gold Beach, and Juno Beach, which were British, Canadian, and Australian soldiers, mostly. Actually, I'm not sure about Australian soldiers, but for sure, British and Canadian. And one of the operations for June the 6th for the British sector was to capture Pegasus Bridge, codenamed Pegasus Bridge. And there's a fantastic museum there. We had a church service outdoors with an amazing band. I mean, just the British know how to throw a ceremony with the pomp and circumstance. It really was phenomenal. And just to see the bridge and everything that went with it. And then we went to Pointe du Hoc, which is for all the Rangers out there. That's a very special place. On June the 6th, 1944, 2nd and 5th Ranger Battalions scaled the cliffs at Pointe du Hoc, and they participated in really a full day of amazing mountaineering operations and heavy fighting to secure those cliffs. Ronald Reagan famously gave a speech there on the 40th anniversary of D-Day, 1984. You can look up that speech on YouTube, The Boys at Pointe du Hoc. It really is amazing, and there's everything about the point really is preserved. And we had a great ceremony there. There were some guys from the Ranger Battalions who were there. The U.S. Ambassador to France was there, gave a speech, and some other dignitaries. We laid wreaths, and it was really, I mean, a lot of the The craters are still there. You can see where some of the German bunkers were located. It was really a well-preserved battlefield. So if you go to Normandy, make sure to go and see Pointe du Hoc and see what the Rangers were confronted with there on June the 6th. And that really was the 5th. We went in a bit early because obviously June the 6th was the 79th anniversary of D-Day, and we had a long day. We started off back at the U.S. Cemetery at Omaha Beach. There was a massive ceremony that took place there. Jack Foy, the veteran who I was taking care of, he gave a phenomenal speech. I'll link to it when I post this video on Twitter. By the way, I've been posting all of my podcasts on Twitter. Go check them out if you haven't. But I'll link his speech below this podcast when I stream it on Twitter. It really was an amazing speech. He really described his service in about a 12-minute speech. It's well worth your time to hear this living history from someone who fought in the Ardennes at the Battle of the Bulge with George S. Patton's Third Army. Truly remarkable. And he, even though Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin was there, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Mark Milley, I know, James McConville, Army Chief of Staff, they were all there, but Jack Foy stole the show. Ask anyone who was there. His speech was phenomenal, and everyone really was very appreciative and just blown away by his speaking ability at the age of 97, and just the respect and reverence that he has for all of his comrades, living and dead, who fought in Normandy and in the European theater in World War II. From there, we went back to Cannes. We had another banquet that evening in Cannes. And then Wednesday the 7th, which was 2 days ago, I'm recording this on Friday the 9th, we went and visited a school, Joan of Arc school in Cannes, in the Cannes area. It really was amazing to see these kids. I mean, the way they welcomed these veterans. We broke up the veterans into groups of 2, and they visited several classrooms. We had translators. We had a 15-year-old translator who was translating between French and English. He was phenomenal. His mother is British, and so it was interesting to hear this young man speak French with a French accent and English with a British accent. But he did a tremendous job translating for these veterans and the kids. I mean, I can't, I can go on and on about how amazing the people were. I mean, these kids, they were respectful, they were healthy, it was nothing like what you see in most public schools in America. These kids were French. You see very few cell phones. It was just, the whole thing just blew me away. It was eye-opening. And on a certain level, it was depressing as an American to see, just what a random public school looks like in France versus what is happening in the American educational system. But anyway, I don't want to detract from what was an amazing day there spent at the school. We really enjoyed interacting with the kids. We had a ceremony outside where some of them gave speeches. They presented the veterans with a couple of tokens of their appreciation. We had some pictures taken. It was amazing. For those of you, I think I mentioned on the French, on the Napoleon podcast, I love the French national anthem, La Marseillaise. It's an amazing national anthem, and look up the words. The lyrics are pretty amazing. It's a French revolutionary tune, a very bloodthirsty time in French history, and the words to their national anthem reflect that. Look them up. But it's pretty amazing to hear young kids sing that. But it's a very stirring national anthem. And then we had our farewell dinner at Cannes City Hall. Again, I cannot express to you just how beautiful is the city of Cannes. These buildings that weren't destroyed in the war, even the ones that were destroyed but were rebuilt, are just in magnificent condition. The architecture, the landscaping, just the aesthetic, the paintings. Everything about it was just truly magnificent. You don't see things like that in public areas in the United States. But but that's a conversation for a different podcast. And then we got up the next morning and departed back to the United States. So just to wrap up this podcast, I want to just express my gratitude to everyone who made that program possible. But most of all to these World War II veterans, in particular Jack Foy. And I expressed my eternal gratitude to him. He and his generation are an inspiration to me and so many other active duty and retired military veterans who have worn the uniform, who have deployed, who have served in tough situations. We had it easy compared to men like Jack. I mean, this man, he fought for months in below zero temperatures, fighting quite literally for his life against a well-trained and vicious, lethal enemy in the German military, especially at the beginning of the invasion. And it really is amazing just to be a part of that, program, to witness firsthand the appreciation the Norman people have for their liberators. And as I gave a very short talk at one of the dinners, and one thing that was made evident to me as a part of the program, obviously the number one mission for the program was to take care of those who took care of us, to honor these veterans, to give them closure, to give them an experience where they can truly be proud of their service. Not that they're not, but sometimes in America, it's hard to look at things the way that everything's turned out, and have a lot of reason for hope or joy. Trust me, a lot of veterans express that sentiment, which is extremely sad, but it is what it is. But for them to go over there and see a different story in France, to see a country that is, or at least a region of a country that is still in relatively good shape, where culturally they're strong. They seem to have done pretty well compared to some of the more populated areas of the United States that I've seen. And it really, that was fun for me to see the joy that was on the faces of these veterans, who know at the sunset years of their life, that they truly were a part of something special, and that they brought liberty, they brought freedom to these people in Normandy. And that is forever part of their legacy, and it's a part of everyone's legacy who has served this country in uniform. That, our military might be a woke dumpster fire now, but at least at some point in our past, we stood for something good. So I wanted to express my appreciation for that, but I also, wanted to say that for all of us, the second part, the second purpose, I think, of the program was hopefully that everyone would be inspired, and they would decide to live a life that was worthy of such an endeavor, of such a sacrifice, and that even though so much that's going wrong in our country is totally out of our control, we can, if our audience, as I said on my opening podcast, if our audience is God in history, we may not be honored in this life, in this brief moment between the two eternities, before life and after death. We had this brief interlude on earth, and even though it might not be popular now, if our audience is God in history, and we're standing for the right things, and we're controlling what we can control, then in my book, we are honoring the legacy of the generation, the warriors, the statesmen who forged this country. And even though if the country at large is spiraling, in pockets of it, in cities and towns and families, in certain places, we can still live up to the ideals that those great men fought for. So I appreciate you tuning in this week. I hope you enjoyed this recap of my week, or 10 days in Normandy, and we'll catch you next time.